Hey, it's me, Hrishikesh Kannan, popularly known as Hrishi K. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and hit the bell icon now to get the latest videos and get taken into a world of entertainment, culture, sport, business, and current affairs.
But they're just a really small common garden, brown bird. And, you don't think anything of them. But these birds were obviously blown to the island on a big freak storm, and then they found themselves on the island with very little to eat. Finches are seed eaters or insects or nectar, and there isn't much of that on the island. So they had to look elsewhere. And where they looked were the other animals on the island, which were the seabirds. And what they do is they jump on the tail of these seabirds and break through one of the big flight feathers, and then the blood flows, and then the little vampire finches start lapping up the blood, and there's a bit of a sort of melee as lots of other finches go, oh, there's one that's been cut, and they all jump on the back.
Okay, very pleased to welcome Huw Cordey. He's series producer of A Perfect Planet for the BBC. Lots to discuss, but Huw, are you in the United Kingdom? And if so, I hope your family and you are safe and healthy.
Yes, they are all there. I'm in Bristol, which is in the western part of the UK, and I'm at home with my family, and everyone's well. Thank you very much, and I hope that's true for you and your family. You look as if you're at home too.
Yes, so far so good. Work from home is working just fine as of now. You, I don't know if you know this, but you spend so much time in India, but you would know. We had a glacier ice burst or an ice avalanche in Uttarakhand, which is in the north of India and the Himalayas. Bridges, roads, power projects, flash floods, dams, rivers overflowing, about 50 confirmed deaths, 150 missing. And everybody who's going to, watch A Perfect Earth will resonate with this eventually when they see the final episode. Because this is what it's all about, isn't it? Let's start with that. The fact that in modern day India, as close as where we are to where this happened, there was a glacier ice burst and it caused major damage. Why is this happening?
Well, it's very simple. And I think everyone's tuning into this now, that it is climate change, and it's now widely accepted by almost everybody, a few presidents notwithstanding. And it's about our burning of fossil fuels. So the more fossil fuels we burn, the hotter our planet gets. And that impact is seen in our destabilized weather, the melting of the ice caps and so on. So, we have the series, A Perfect Planet, is about the forces of nature, the natural forces, the volcanoes, the ocean currents, weather, and the sun. And humans, you could consider as a fifth force. And it's this force, we're so powerful now that we're destabilizing the balance of those other forces. And the result is what you've just described in Uttarakhand,
yeah. In the Himalayas in the north. Yeah. Huw, you mentioned those elements very quickly, but I want to actually spend a little time on each one of them. The fact that volcanoes, active, dormant, semi-active, are so essential to life. One would always think of them as molten lava and destructive and things like that. But some of the most fertile lands on the planet are lands that have come out of or just besides volcanoes. Let's talk about that.
Yes, I think most people would agree that volcanoes are a destructive force. But I think what most people wouldn't or would be surprised about is that we wouldn't be sitting here without them. I mean, they are fundamental to life on our planet. They created our breathable atmosphere. They created the oceans. They're responsible for 80% of the land that we have on this planet. And the thing you've just mentioned, they fertilize our planet. So when volcanoes erupt, billions of tons of minerals are ejected from these volcanoes, and they end up in the seas and the land and help fertilize our planet. So as you mentioned, the places with volcanoes tend to be the most fertile on the planet.
And the sun itself, one looks upon it as this large ball of energy. And you've actually gone out there with a great deal of research and filming and actually filmed areas like the North Pole, which spends 6 months in total darkness and then 6 months in total light. And how there are certain creatures there who literally come back to life. I mean, I was stunned seeing that particular frog whose heart literally starts beating. I'd like you to describe that, please.
Yes, it's one of the most wondrous things about nature. No matter where you are on the planet, animals have found a way to adapt. So this frog can't survive, happily jumping around during the harsh winters where it lives. So instead of it's a kind of hibernation, but it's extreme form of hibernation because this frog literally freezes. For all intents and purposes, it's like a block of ice. And it'll stay like that until the warmth of the sun brings it back to life. And it's a sort of, it's extraordinary to see this animal that is frozen solid. It looks dead, suddenly coming back to life and sort of effectively melting, and its heart stopped beating, and suffering no ill effects of the experience.
Yeah, and let's do a rewind back to the volcanoes. I mean, the fact, and I literally was watching this, and I said to myself, I'd be damned that the floor of volcanoes, or just the inclines of those craters of volcanoes, could actually be fertile breeding grounds for certain animals to lay their eggs. Fascinating.
Exactly. So there is all the Galapagos Islands are volcanic. The youngest of them is an island called Fernandina, and in fact, it erupted 2 weeks before our film shoot. Fortunately, the lava went down one side of the volcano that we weren't planning to ascend from. So the shoot went ahead, but we were there to film this land iguana. This is a very large reptile, very large lizard, maybe sort of a couple of meters, 2 or 3 meters long from head to the end of its tail. And every year, the female land iguanas ascend the side of this volcano to the crater rim, and then descend to the bottom and lay their eggs in the warm volcanic ash. So that volcanic ash incubates their eggs. Extraordinary. And it's worked very well for them. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. But of course, occasionally, when there's a massive eruption, all the animals that are there at the time and the eggs will be destroyed. But it's such a successful way of rearing your young that land iguanas keep coming and doing that. So they're very well adapted to that behavior.
And in the wonders of nature, which is what must really fascinate you about your job, is the fact that there are these tiny insects who would actually get on to figs and lay their eggs and immediately pass away, die in 48 hours of having life after giving birth. I mean, this has got to be years and decades of research at the BBC and its allied bodies.
There is a lot of research that goes into these series. It was 4 years in the making. We spent at least 6 months to a year compiling all these stories. But that story you just mentioned with the fig wasps, it just shows how the smallest things, fig trees are a keystone species. You have many of them in India. In fact, your famous banyan trees, which I've very luckily seen, are massive trees. They're a kind of fig. And all fig trees, all wild fig trees, are pollinated by tiny fig wasps, so small you can barely see them, 2 millimeters long. So this incredible ecosystem of and keystone species of figs are continued by these tiny little insects, which shows how even the smallest things are vital to our planet. But as you say, these fig wasps, they enter the fig at a certain time and they pollinate the flowers inside, because a fig fruit has the flowers on the inside. And once the fig is in the right stage of development, the fig wasp is allowed to come in. It lays eggs in the flowers of the fig wasp and then dies. And the males hatch earlier, 1 day before the females. And the males then mate with their sisters, just a kind of incest, mate with their sisters, and then they tunnel out to the outside of the fig. Females hatch, and then leave the fig and go off to find another fig tree in exactly the right stage of development. It's amazing, and those females only live for a couple of days themselves. So it's an extraordinary life cycle.
Well, Huw Cordey is director, series producer of A Perfect Planet. A Perfect Planet premieres in India on the 8th of March at 9 p.m. only on Sony BBC Earth. So make sure you set all your alarms and get there, because this is a fascinating, absolutely fascinating 5-part series that premieres on the 8th. Huw, before we continue, and we will, because we still have weather in the oceans to talk about. Two of the biggest reasons why I got into anything to do with voice on the radio or on TV and or as a broadcaster. One was the great Dan Maskell, who used to commentate at Wimbledon. Unfortunately, he is no more. And the other is Sir David Attenborough. And, you have a long association, and it's still amazing. You can start a brand new series and you think you've heard enough of him, and the moment his voice comes on, the goosebumps come back all over again. So just a little bit about this legendary, extraordinary man.
Yes, natural history films are totally synonymous with Sir David Attenborough, and he's now 94 years old. And yesterday he recorded this incredible message. I don't know whether you saw it on social media. He's still very much active promoting, particularly now, the issue of climate change. But he's got this amazing enthusiasm, amazing drive. He's obviously an extremely intelligent person, but somebody who's still doing what he's doing at 94. It's because he's just fascinated and still so enthusiastic about the natural world. And I've been very lucky to have traveled the world with him on one of his series, Life of Mammals. In fact, we came to India. We filmed in the Ret Temple of Deshnog, and we went to the Kumbh Mela. It was a very, very good experience. But, he's as nice in person as he appears on television. And you can't say that about all famous people and celebrities. But David is, as you find him, an extremely interested, enthusiastic, intelligent person. And, I'm not sure what natural history television would do without him, to be honest.
Very well said. But just out of curiosity, I mean, how does this work? I mean, does he still, after all these decades of experience, have to rehearse, or is he a perfectionist? Or does he come and just get on the mic and nail it? Would he read it a few times, mark out his intonations like the rest of us mere mortals?
Well, okay. So with a series like this, he's just employed to do the narration. But of course, he's not going to read anything he doesn't agree with. So he goes through the scripts, and sometimes he changes the scripts. And it's always very annoying when you see some of his changes. You think, damn, that's better. Here I am, and I'm 30, 40 years younger than David, and it's like, oh, damn, he's corrected my grammar, or he's corrected some way of saying something. But obviously there's also ways in which he likes to say things. But I've been working on series that he's narrated for many years, so I kind of know how he writes. So I get less corrections, I think. I think it's, I'm pleased to say. But he still does, makes corrections. And I think when it comes to narrating them, I mean, famously, he can narrate a 50-minute film in less than 50 minutes, on a good day. What he does is, his standard technique is to do a complete run through of the film without stopping, and note the lines that either were fluffed or weren't as good as they could be, and so on and so forth. He's doing the same thing in the booth. And then at the end, you go through all the lines. So you just read out time cues and you say, David, can you do, 357 again? And he goes, what was wrong with it? Okay, yeah. And so it goes on. But it rarely takes, Perfect Planet probably took 2 and a bit hours per episode. But one of the interesting things about Perfect Planet is that obviously with a big landmark series from the BBC, we use professional services, we use the sort of high-end facilities houses. And so when we were doing this series, we'd more or less finished all the offline editing. That's the bit where you take all the footage and you create the picture. But there's all the sound effects to do, and the music and the narration's still to go. And that happened we got to that stage at about sort of February, March last year, just at the beginning of the pandemic and the lockdown. By the lockdown, we'd only done 2 of the episodes in a studio, in a proper sound booth with David. So we still had 3 of the narrations to go. By this stage, he was shielding in his home in lockdown. Obviously, sure, David, 94. Yeah. So we had to completely change. This gives you an insight into the great David Attenborough. So we had to completely change the way we do things. So he's at his house in London, Richmond, and we send him up with a very professional mic, a bit like what I can see behind you there, sort of, sure, a really high quality microphone. We sterilize it, we put it outside his door, it's brought into the house and, gives it sort of, 24 hours. And then he used that microphone, and there was a cable running from the microphone out of his dining room window into the garden. He covered his walls of his dining room with duvet covers and sheets to sort of stop the sound bouncing around, stop it making it sound so echoey. And then the cable went into the garden where our sound recordist recorded him on a table, you know, and that's how we recorded 3 of the episodes. The first time we did it, it was incredibly hot. So the sound recordist, the dubbing mixer, had to sit underneath an umbrella. It was very, very hot. Second time, it was raining. So that was more difficult. And he's still performing that way. So all the narrations that he does now is done with him sitting in his dining room. But of course, it's now midwinter in England. So David's built a little shed in the garden where the sound recordist or the dubbing mixer now sits. So a little bit covered by from the elements. But I would challenge any of your viewers to try to guess which ones we did in a studio and which ones we did in his dining room. So, and he completely took it in his stride. I think that was the important thing. He didn't bat an eyelid. He said, okay, well, we still got to do it. This is the way we got to do it. No problem.
Yeah, you know, you've got to change with the times, and then that shows that he's really young at heart. So he did have a talk back with the gentleman outside, you know, chatting with him.
There was a 3-way going on. I was in Bristol on a Zoom link. So we had 2 computers set up. I could see David, I could talk to David, and then I could talk also to the dubbing mixer in the garden in London. So there was a 3-way thing going on. So it was pretty interesting. But
thank you very much for that. I mean, those are very valuable lessons for me as a voice actor, a radio presenter. So, you know, just an insight into the way you guys work. But you're right. I mean, one can't imagine which one was done, you know, on the fly, as it were, and which one was done in a state-of-the-art studio.
You didn't notice, did you? And you're a professional, Hrishi. So did you notice?
No, I didn't. You know, it's like, you know, they say that the Beatles did some of their best music up in an ashram in Hrishikesh, up in the mountains in the Himalayas here. And, you know, sometimes you can't make out the difference between what was put out on Abbey Road and there. I think it's just the feeling that's most important. You know, that's really what counts. Yeah. Let's come back to the weather and the oceans. The oceans, again, must be terrain that you're absolutely fascinated by. The way you film the currents, the oceans, and you tell these stories. It's so much of it that's personal, isn't it?
And also, that was probably the most difficult one, because it's very difficult to see an ocean current. You know, water movement is incredibly difficult. And obviously, a lot of the time it's happening below the surface. But I think by choosing the sequences we did, I think it becomes very illustrative and clear as to why you're getting wildlife in certain places. If you take bait balls, for example, this is where predators come together to feed on a sort of school of fish. And so the fish are where the currents are occurring, because that's where the nutrients are. And so the predators, the dolphins, the sharks, they're following these currents too, because they know it's like a motorway. They know by following these currents, they'll come across eventually a food source. It's a very, very unpredictable thing, but when it happens, you know, it can be unbelievably exciting. And, you know, some of the most dramatic moments you'll see in an ocean. And we were very lucky with that one. It was filmed in South Africa, and the South African cameraman that filmed it said it was the most intense bait ball he had ever been part of or filmed. He said sometimes it was just sort of enveloping him, and that was a bit worrying, because when the school of fish were sort of surrounding him, he was worried that the sharks were going to come through and sort of like bite him by mistake. And so it was very intense, but it was pretty impressive. That's the opening sequence in the ocean episode. But of course, we used a little bit of graphics to try to illustrate how these currents work. And, you know, it's extraordinary that, you know, every single part of our ocean is joined. They're not, we always think of oceans being separate, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean. Of course, they're all one ocean. They all join together, and currents circulate these oceans over 1,000 years. And, you know, every drop of water on the planet sort of follows these oceans.
Yeah. And weather systems, please. Let's close that loop.
Well, yes, weather systems. I mean, for us, we call the program weather, but it's kind of more like climate, because it's all about the distribution of fresh water. So that's what weather is. It's a transport device. It it's, most of the weather is formed over the ocean. So water evaporates, creates clouds, and then is blown around the planet by circulatory wind patterns and also the spin of the Earth. And where they go is generally very predictable. And it's been like this for 10,000 years. So animals have, sort of timed their behavior to the predictable cycles of weather. So if you take the Amazon, where we filmed 50,000 giant river turtles coming to nest, they turn up at a very particular time because that's the moment when the water level drops far enough to reveal these sandbars. And obviously turtles need to lay their eggs on land. So these turtles come up to land, lay their eggs, and then that sandbar remains dry for long enough for the eggs to hatch and the hatchlings to leave and enter the water systems. Now, the problem is that when weather systems are altered, sometimes this happens naturally, but what's happening now, as we discussed right at the start of this, is that human activity, burning of fossil fuel, is changing weather systems. That's upsetting these huge events, these events. So, what's happening more often in the Amazon now is that turtles lay their eggs and rains return too early and wash all the eggs away, kill all the hatchling turtles. And this is happening all over the world. You described it with the glacier melt at the start of this interview. These unexpected events are not coincidental. They are part of a bigger event that we humans are creating, climate change.
I know you don't go into these series looking to create humor with nature or with animals.
But, sometimes we do.
Oh, you do? I thought it just happens on the fly or accident. Because I found it very amusing that there would be thousands, even 1 million snakes. And, the male snakes come out of hibernation in one of your episodes. And the female snake comes out a little later, and she has a bit of a, like they say back in the days, there used to be a gladiator duel yes. to woo the lady they want to marry or impress, and she takes them up a hill. I thought that was incredibly funny. Yes. I leave you to tell the story, please.
Yes, well, these are the garter snakes, some of the most northerly reptiles on the planet, and they're a very short window because obviously it's quite far north, so summers are short, so they've got to get on with things. So they come out at the first opportunity. Sometimes there's still snow on the ground when they come out. They come out, the males come out early, and they're smaller than the females. They come out earlier. They then warm up in the sun, so they're ready to go. They've got some energy to fight off their competitors and show what they're made of to the females. Then the larger females come out, and I've actually been and witnessed this. And then the males go berserk. When a female comes out, it's like it's every male for himself, and he's just trying to, be the one. And in that case, that in the sequence that you just mentioned, yes, the female gives them a sort of like a task. Say, well, let's see who's going to come up to scratch. So she goes up the side of this gully, quite steep gully, and the males are hanging on and they're falling by the wayside. By the time she gets to the top, there's only a few left. So she goes, well, you'll do then. You're obviously a good partner.
And also, as somebody who's creating these things, there must be so many points when you yourself are completely surprised out of your skin. I saw in one of the episodes, a small little bird, almost like a cute little Tweety bird, turned out to be a vampire bird who actually sucks on blood. And the mother bird, or the bird that it's sucking blood out of, doesn't even seem to notice. And I was like, isn't that a little bit of like how what mosquitoes do to us? I mean, they gnaw away at us and we kind of flick them off, and then suddenly we realize that they're sucking blood from us.
Exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah.
This is one of the most extraordinary stories. I was on this shoot. It comes from an island in the Galapagos called Wolf Island. It's a very small, tiny little island, uninhabited. Very difficult to get to. Very difficult to actually be allowed on the island. It took us about 2 years to get permission. And on this island is tens of thousands of seabirds. And one of the dominant seabirds is something called the Nazca Booby. So it's quite a large bird, large white bird, and a fish eater, obviously. And they nest on the island each evening. And this is where they also rear their young. But on top of that, there's a small brown bird, a bit like a sparrow. I'm pretty sure you have sparrows in India.
Yeah,
So, we used to have loads of them in the UK, but the numbers have absolutely plummeted for many reasons, where we're going to. But they're just a really small, common garden, brown bird. And, you don't think anything of them. But these birds were obviously blown to the island on a big freak storm, and then they found themselves on the island with very little to eat. Finches are seed eaters or insects or nectar, and there isn't much of that on the island. So they had to look elsewhere. And where they looked were the other animals on the island, which were the seabirds. And what they do is they jump on the tail of these seabirds and break through one of the big flight feathers, and then the blood flows, and then the little vampire finches start lapping up the blood, and there's a bit of a sort of melee as lots of other finches go, oh, there's one that's been cut, and they all jump on the back. And it is extraordinary that you mentioned it, that some of these seabirds, they don't seem to care. They just sort of okay, well, somebody's on the back of my tail, well, that's all right. Others don't like it. Others do sort of shake them off, and scientists believe that the reason why some of the boobies don't seem to mind being parasitized by the finches is because it probably started as a way of grooming the bird. So these little finches might have removed parasites. And so they were a good thing to the seabirds. And so some of the more dim-witted boobies haven't quite cottoned on to the fact that they're no longer grooming them. They're now drinking their blood. But they were only made into a formal species about a year or two ago. So they are the newest of the bird species on Galapagos, the vampire finch. And it's one of the great things about the planet is that, we get these amazing evolutionary sort of oddities, but it's a consequence of volcanoes, because the volcanoes create these islands in the middle of nowhere, and then animals find their way there. They drift on currents, they get blown there on storms, and obviously separated from their cousins on the mainland, they often evolve in very different ways. So 5% of the planet's land are volcanoes, but they contain 20% of the world's species.
There you have it, A Perfect Planet, 5-part series premieres in India. The Hindi premiere on the 8th of March, Sony BBC Earth. It's really unmissable and absolute landmark there. I have to sign off by asking you how the BBC manages to get it so right. I mean, no disrespect to any other platform, but when you see natural history shows, shows on the environment, shows on wildlife, on other OTT or mainstream terrestrial television stations, what the BBC does is definitely a class apart in that aspect. And for somebody who's been associated with the institution for such a long time, I know it's very difficult to encompass it in a couple of words, but how do you get it right each time around?
Okay, well, I'll try. I think partly is we've been doing it a long time. The BBC Naturalist Unit has been going for many decades. So, we've had 50 or 60 years making these programs. And of course, each time we get a little bit better at it. But there are two ingredients that are very, very important for the kind of films I make. One is time and the other is money. And the BBC have always understood that. If you want to create these ambitious series, you need time and money. You need money to fail. Otherwise, you're always going for the low-hanging fruit. These projects are ambitious and we're always pushing the boundaries. And so each time you see one of these series, they always seem a little bit better than the last one because we're always pushing the boundaries and new technology comes along. So that's the key, Hrishi. I would say time and money and heritage, I suppose, at the Naturalist Unit for 50 years making these things.
Wonderful. Huw Cordey, thank you very much for your time and your patience. You've been very generous and lots of great insights for me personally as well as professionally. Have a great day ahead and a safe time to you and your family. Take care. Cheers.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Hrishi. Thank you very much.